And welcome to my weather world. It's our weather world is what it is. We've got conditions today. Let's talk about what's going on outside right now. You can see behind me, we got the screens. That's one of the sky cameras just showing blue skies outside right now. I'm sure you've looked out your window to see what the weather's like, and you may have even stepped outside for a while to enjoy the sunshine and cool temperatures this morning. It looks like a very nice day, and we're going to take a look at why that's the case here. In fact, let's do that right now. Let's go over to the weather wall here. And again, conditions are fairly clear. You may also notice, especially if you have any wind chimes outside, anything that moves around and rustles, we have a bit of a wind. Yeah, a little bit of a breeze. You can see the flag on top of the building here as we look. That breeze has been picking up this morning, and it's going to be breezy throughout the day today. So what's going on? Well, we have clear skies and a bit of wind. Well, let's take a look at the temperatures also. Temperatures currently ranging in the 50s outside right now from Sacramento through Stockton and Modesto. Lake Tahoe currently right there at the freezing mark at 32 degrees. But we need to take a look at the big picture. If we're going to do some forecasting for today, we got to look at what's going on with the cloud cover. Nothing over California right now. We've got the clear skies, so let's zoom out and you can see where we do have some clouds. We're looking for, again, those areas of gray and white that show up, and we really want to know what direction they're spinning. Remember talking about that? Areas of high pressure, areas of low pressure. When we're talking about high pressure, that's where we get the clear skies because the air is sinking. Areas of low pressure, that's where we get the clouds developing because the air is rising. Areas of low pressure, they spin counterclockwise. Areas of high pressure, they spin clockwise. So can you see anything out here that looks like an area of low pressure or an area of high pressure? Anything? Well, one of the things, this is kind of a harder day to find these, and so what I'm going to do is we're going to change this. This is an image here. It's actually a composite of infrared as well as visible image, and that means that we're picking up the heat. That's the infrared part, and the visible, that's just from the light reflecting off the clouds. And then we're going to turn this into what's called water vapor. This is an imagery taken by a satellite. This is a picture from a satellite that's looking at the amount of water vapor in the air, and it makes it a little bit easier to see where we have areas of high pressure, low pressure, spinning areas in the atmosphere. And so I can see really two pronounced areas where we have some spinning going on. First one is right in here. So this is an area and it's spinning around in a counterclockwise fashion. And so what is this area here? High pressure? No, it's low pressure. So we have an area of low pressure here. The other area is over here. You can see this big area spinning around. We have an area that's going counterclockwise. So this is an area of low pressure. But what about high pressure? Is there any high pressure? Well, we've got the clear skies over top of us, so there's got to be some high pressure somewhere, and that's what we have going on right in here. Cloud cover's kind of coming up, and then it's dropping down, and this is why we have those winds that have been picking up, is because we have this ridge of high pressure that's building in that area of low pressure that's coming in from the north, and so that's what's going to be driving those winds. We have high pressure. That's what's bringing about our sunny morning that we have here in Northern California right now. So that's what's going on with our weather right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that we have. Let's approach those questions and see if we can find ourselves some answers. Taking our walk across the studio. It's a beautiful day to walk across the studio, isn't it? So today I have a question, and this is from Margaret. And what I love about this question is this is a question that I've never thought of myself. This is something that she came up with that I thought was really kind of interesting. So Margaret asks, how much does the moon cool the Earth? Well, that's an interesting question. And to talk about that question, let's go over to the weather wall. We're going to go over here because we need to go out at night and talk about the moon, even though it affects us also during the daytime. So here we go. When there's no moon outside, of course the temperature is going to be a certain level. We're going to have temperature out here. And when the moon comes up, does that affect the temperature at all? Well, what's interesting, of course, the moon can be very bright, especially when it's full. So does the difference between no moon and full moon, what is the difference? So without the moon and with the moon, how does that impact the temperature? Well, the light from the moon, where does it come from? Does the moon give off its own light? No, it borrows light. It borrows light from the sun, so it reflects. This is all reflected light that comes down at night from the moon. And does that light have an impact on our temperature? Well, believe it or not, it does, but just a little bit. we're looking at very, very tiny difference in temperature. So it actually warms things by 1/100th to possibly up to 2/100ths of a degree, depending on the circumstances, what's going on. It could be a little bit warmer. So with a moon or without a moon, it actually does make a difference in the temperature. And with the full moon out at night, it actually helps to bump the temperatures up slightly. It's not perceptible. You're not going to notice the difference in temperature, but it does have a slight impact on the temperature. It actually warms things. But the moon does also cool the Earth, but not overall, okay? Just certain areas, and that happens when we get the sun going across where the moon is. This is called an eclipse. This is called a solar eclipse. And what happens with the temperature? What's the difference between when we have full sunshine and when we have an eclipsed sun? When that moon passes in front of the sun and casts the shadow on the Earth. Well, if you're standing in that shadow, you're going to notice a difference in the temperature. In fact, I was lucky enough to go and experience back in 2017 the full eclipse that cut across the United States, and I went out and enjoyed that, and that was quite a sight to be able to see. But one of the things that I really noticed was how much colder it got as the shadow of the moon passed overhead. It was something that was definitely noticeable. So what is the temperature difference? How much does it cool? Well, again, it depends on where you are. It depends on the atmospheric conditions as far as how much humidity is in the air and things like that. But generally speaking, if you're going to be standing outside and the moon covers the sun with an eclipse, it's going to get anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees cooler than it was when the sun was shining down on you. So that's a decent difference in temperature. So the moon can have an impact on the temperature of the air, but again, it's only where the shadow is cast. And so everywhere outside of that, it really doesn't have an impact. But just some interesting things to make note of and to store those answers back there in the memory, and maybe you can draw upon it at some future time, especially if you're going to be watching an eclipse. And we've got one coming in the future. There always is, isn't there? Well, let's go ahead and go back to the stool and get to our second question. Thank you so much, though, for asking that question, Margaret. Second question that I have here, this is actually from Beverly. And Beverly wants to know, why does it snow when temperatures are above freezing? That's a really good question. You ever notice that, especially if you live in the mountains? We had that experience just the other day up around Lake Tahoe, where the temperatures were actually above freezing and it was snowing. And that's a good thing. We like that when that happens. We like the snow. It's usually a more wet snow. But how does snow form? Well, let's quickly take a look at this. So we have our cloud, and we're going to divide it up into sections here. Draw your cloud. And so there's this point here. You ever wonder why clouds are flat on the bottom? Because this is a temperature that the atmosphere reaches right here that's called the dew point. And this is where condensation occurs. We talked about that in one of my last episodes, where we talk about condensation and how what it is you have water vapor that cools down to a point where it changes from a vapor back into a liquid. Well, that's the process that's taking place right here. The temperature is cold enough where you have the water vapor that as it rises, it cools to a point where you get condensation. So you have little droplets of water, and so you can see the cloud. Here, when the water is vapor, you can't see the cloud. Not until those droplets form, then you can see the cloud. So as these little droplets are in the cloud, they're chilly. And we talked about it before in previous segments, that as the air pushes up, guess what happens to the temperature? The higher you go, the colder it gets. So these little droplets of water continue to climb. They get colder and colder and colder, and eventually they're going to reach a point where the temperature, let's have it 32 degrees, is reached. So we have a freezing point. Well, what's interesting is these little droplets of water don't immediately freeze. They continue to go up and they become what's called supercooled. And so you have these little droplets of water that are here in their environment, or with the air around them, where it's below freezing. And it doesn't take much. All you need is just a little trigger. If that little droplet hits another little droplet or something like that, it'll actually start to freeze. It can. But here we have a situation where everything's going up at the same rate, and so they're not bumping into each other. And you get to another layer here where this is kind of a mix of ice. So you have a mix of ice and liquid in this area, this realm here. And then up here, this is all ice. It's so cold that this is all going to be ice up here. So you get the crystals, you get the snowflakes that start forming, or that are up here, blown up here. But in here, this is where the snowflakes actually form, because what happens is you get these little crystals that start to form, and what they do is they start to steal. They get used that you need to have the water vapor to form snowflakes, and we can talk about that exact process later on. But you have what's called a little ice crystal, and they're a little hexagon, so they have 6 sides. And what they do is they take the water vapor out of the air, and they start to grow. These snowflakes start to grow, and so you get these little shapes that start to form on them, and they grow, and you get the little 6-sided snowflake that starts to form up in the cloud. And it's using the water vapor to form that snowflake. And so what happens is the raindrops that are up there, they shrink, they get smaller, and the snowflakes get bigger. And so they form. And so we have this process going on here, and it has like a name actually. It's called the Bergeron process. And these snowflakes eventually get so big, or the winds start to die down, that they fall. And so the snowflake starts to fall through the cloud, and it falls with temperatures. It stays a snowflake until it gets down below 32 degrees. And as it hits below 32 degrees, or I should say above 32 degrees, it gets above like 33, 34, 35 degrees, it starts to melt. But the thing about the air is the air is a pretty good insulator. You ever wonder why you have double pane windows? Well, it's because it traps the air and it keeps it the same temperature. So the snowflake doesn't really warm up that fast. As it falls down, yes, it's falling into warmer temperatures, but it takes a while for that snowflake to start to melt. So we have the snowflake, and let's say it's now here, and it's not quite as big because it's starting to melt. And then it falls down farther, and it's just got a little bit here. And then finally, here's the ground down here. And when it hits the ground, the snowflake, it's still a snowflake, but it's kind of, it's not quite as nice as it was up here in the cloud, but it's still gonna hit the ground as a snowflake. And so it takes a while for it to melt. So even though the temperature up here is 32 degrees inside this cloud, then when it starts to melt, down at the surface, you can have temperatures up to 40 degrees. And you can still have snowflakes falling out of the sky. And so that's why snowflakes, it can snow with the temperature is actually above freezing, because it takes a while for that snowflake to melt. And one of the big reasons why is because the air is such a good insulator that it doesn't allow that snowflake to melt as fast. And it really depends also on the humidity of the air as to how fast that snowflake melts. That's another factor that's involved with that. But for the most part, again, it's just because it takes time. It takes time for that snowflake to make its way down and start to melt, and then finally hit the ground. And it can be above freezing when it hits the ground. So that is why it can be snowing when the temperature is actually above freezing. Let's take a look. We have one more question I wanted to touch on here. This third question, this is given to me from Melina from Penn Valley, and she asks, have you always wanted to be a meteorologist? Well, that's interesting because, when I was growing up, I didn't even know what a meteorologist was. When I was really young, I just loved to learn things, and I asked a lot of questions. I think my parents got really tired of me asking questions when I was younger because I was very interested in a lot of different things. And I just liked to learn about things. And so I went through, elementary school, I went through high school, and I just loved to learn about things. And when I got into college, they said that you needed to choose something to study. And I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting because I like a lot of different things. And I was always interested in science. And I had an earth science class. It was a class that was about all the different aspects of the earth. And part of that, a segment of that class, was about the weather. And I thought, that's really interesting. I want to learn more about that. And so that's what I did, is I went to school and became a meteorologist. I got into a program and got a degree in meteorology. And from there, I got interested, I love to teach. So that allowed me to get into the area of TV and to be able to teach and to teach in classrooms. And I just went from there. But it's been a great experience to become a meteorologist, because what's interesting about meteorology is there's so much stuff to learn. And that's something that I really love to do, and hopefully you do too. I hope that you enjoy to learn, and if you're interested in the weather or anything, whether it's geology or biology or any of the other sciences, pursue that interest and try to learn as much as you can about all the things that are out there to learn. So that was the third question, and that's going to be it for today. But well, you know what? We have some time. Let's take a look. I'm going to see if we have any questions that you might have for me. We can do that on Facebook. I want to make sure I turn down the volume. And let's look here. Let's see what we have. Let's see who's here. Maybe they're going to have to be coming in. I should have turned it on earlier. But again, if you have any questions about things, you can comment on the Facebook site, or you can go ahead and email me at dverdorn@hearst.com and send in your questions. I love it because I'm getting kind of a list of questions and putting them all together, and that way I'll try to answer them. And again, we've got lots of episodes that we've been doing, and we'll be able to get those questions on the air and hopefully give you some answers. And what's great about that is that when I answer a question, and I was just talking to somebody today about this, there's so many other questions that come about. So I'll be thinking about the question and trying to answer it, but then I have to answer another question to answer that question, and that question needs to be answered by another question, and so there's just so many questions that are out there to be answered. And so we're going to go from there, and I would like to thank you for joining me today, and hopefully we all learned something, because again, if you really want to learn something, the best thing to do is to teach it, because that really helps you learn. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your viewing this, and hopefully it inspires you to ask some questions. Have a great day.